The sun hung low like a copper penny in the dusty Montana sky when Penelope Lawson discovered just how little her life was worth to her own kin, one meal. Her heart thundered in her ears, drowning out the bickering of her drunken uncle with the grizzled trader as they haggled over her price, like she was nothing more than a bundle of pelts. "She ain't worth much, skinny as a rail and stubborn as a mule," her uncle Silas spat, the whiskey on his breath potent enough to make Penelope's eyes water as he gripped her arm hard enough to bruise. "But she can cook and clean. $5 and that hot meal you promised." It was 1876, a hard year after a harder winter. Since her parents' death from fever 6 months ago, Penelope had been at the mercy of her father's brother, a man who saw her as nothing but another mouth to feed on his failing ranch. $3, countered the trader, a man with yellowed teeth and eyes that crawled over Penelope's frame in a way that made her skin crawl. "And the meal, take it or leave it." Silas's fingers dug deeper into her arm. "Done." Tears burned in Penelope's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. At 20 years old, she had survived plenty of hardship, but never had she imagined her own blood would trade her away for a plate of beans and salt pork. "Wait." The deep voice cut through the din of the trading post like a knife. All heads turned toward the doorway, where a tall figure stood silhouetted against the fading daylight. As he stepped inside, Penelope could make out a face weathered by sun and wind, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a determined set to his jaw. "I'll give you $20 for the lady," the stranger said, his hand resting casually on the holstered Colt at his hip. The trader's greedy eyes lit up. "20. Well now, that's wasn't talking to you," the stranger interrupted, his gaze fixed on Silas. "I'm making the offer to this gentleman here." Silas squinted suspiciously. "What's your interest in her, mister?" The stranger took another step forward, and Penelope noticed the silver star pinned to his vest. A lawman of some kind. "Name's Finn Hayes," he said, his voice carrying an authority that silenced the trading post. "And my interest is that no one gets sold like cattle in my territory." "She's my kin," Silas protested. "A man's got rights to, no man has rights to sell another human," Finn cut in, his voice hardening. $20. Take it and leave, or I can arrest you for human trafficking and you'll leave with nothing but iron bracelets." Silas hesitated only a moment before snatching the offered money and heading for the door, not sparing Penelope even a backward glance. The trader cleared his throat. "Well now, Marshal, seems like the lady is yours." "What do you aim to? The lady is her own," Finn corrected, his eyes meeting Penelope's for the first time. Something in his gaze made her breath catch respect, perhaps, or simple human decency. After months of being treated like property, it felt foreign. "They sold you for one meal," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "But I promise you this, Miss Lawson, if you'll trust me, you'll feast for a lifetime with me." Penelope stared at him, trying to detect any hint of deceit or ulterior motive. Finding none, she gave a small, cautious nod. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, hating the tremble in her voice. "Then come with me," Finn offered, not reaching for her, not presuming to touch her without permission. "My sister runs a boarding house in town. You'll have a safe place to stay while you figure out what you want to do next." "Why would you help me? You don't know me." The corner of his mouth lifted in a hint of a smile. "Because it's the right thing to do, and because I've seen too much cruelty in this world not to recognize a chance to balance the scales when I see one." Penelope hesitated only a moment longer before taking a step toward him. Whatever awaited her in the company of this stranger couldn't possibly be worse than what her own blood had condemned her to. Little did she know that single step would change the course of her life forever. The town of Silver Creek spread before them as they crested the hill, a collection of wooden buildings rising from the valley floor like islands in a sea of golden prairie grass. Finn guided his horse at a gentle pace, conscious of Penelope perched behind him, her hands cautiously resting at his sides. "That's it there," he said, pointing to the settlement. "Not much to look at, but it's home." "It's bigger than I expected," Penelope replied, her voice almost carried away by the light afternoon breeze. Silver Creek had sprung up after silver was discovered in the nearby mountains. Unlike many boom towns that dried up when the ore ran out, Silver Creek had established itself as a trading hub for the surrounding ranches and homesteads. The main street boasted a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a small church, and various other establishments that formed the backbone of frontier life. As they rode down the dusty main street, Penelope felt the curious stares of townsfolk. She straightened her spine, determined not to appear as broken as she felt. "That's my office." Finn pointed out a small building with Marshall painted across its front. "And there," he nodded toward a 2-story structure with green shutters and a small garden out front, "is my sister's boarding house, the Silver Lark." The boarding house was by far the most well-maintained building on the street. Window boxes filled with hardy wildflowers brightened the facade, and the porch had been swept clean of the omnipresent dust. As Finn helped Penelope dismount, the front door swung open to reveal a woman with the same storm-gray eyes as Finn, though her hair was a shade lighter than his deep brown. "Finn Hayes, you're late for supper again," she called, her mock scolding fading as she noticed Penelope. "And you've brought a guest." "Fiona, this is Miss Penelope Lawson," Finn said, his hand resting lightly on Penelope's shoulder. "Miss Lawson, my sister, Fiona Hayes." Fiona's sharp eyes took in Penelope's worn dress, the fading bruises on her arms, and the wary set of her shoulders. Her expression softened immediately. "You poor thing, you look half-starved. Come inside this instant, I've got stew that needs eating and a spare room that needs occupying." Penelope hesitated. "I don't have any money to pay you, madam." Fiona waved away her concern. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome here. Besides, I could use help around the place. My regular girl left to get married last month and I'm run ragged trying to keep up." Finn squeezed Penelope's shoulder gently. "See, told you it would work out. Fiona's bark is worse than her bite, I promise." "I heard that," Fiona said, but her eyes twinkled with affection. "Now come inside before this food gets cold." The interior of the Silver Lark was as well kept as its exterior, with polished floors, simple but clean furnishings, and the enticing aroma of home cooking filling the air. Penelope's stomach growled audibly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten since the previous evening. "Sit, both of you," Fiona instructed, bustling toward the kitchen. "The other boarders have already eaten, so we'll have the place to ourselves." As they settled at the table, Penelope felt a strange mix of gratitude and suspicion. In her experience, nothing came without a price. "I'll work hard to earn my keep," she told Fiona when the woman returned with 3 bowls of fragrant stew. "I can cook, clean, mend whatever you need." Fiona studied her for a moment. "I'm sure you will, dear, but tonight you eat and rest. Tomorrow is soon enough to worry about work." As they ate, Finn explained how he'd found Penelope at the trading post, carefully editing the story to preserve her dignity. "Disgraceful," Fiona muttered. "That uncle of yours should be horsewhipped." "He was desperate," Penelope found herself saying, though she couldn't explain why she felt compelled to offer even this small defense. "The drought took most of his cattle last year, and the bank's threatening to take his land." "Desperation doesn't excuse treating family like chattel," Finn said firmly. "Every man has choices, even in the worst of times." The conviction in his voice stirred something in Penelope, a fragile hope that perhaps not all men were like her uncle or the trader with the wandering eyes. After dinner, Fiona showed her to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the main street. "It's not much," Fiona apologized, "but it's yours for as long as you need it." "It's perfect," Penelope whispered, running her fingers over the patchwork quilt that covered the bed. After months of sleeping on a pallet in her uncle's kitchen, this felt like unimaginable luxury. When Fiona left, Penelope sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing the tears she'd been holding back all day to fall. They weren't tears of sorrow, but of relief, and beneath that, a tentative flicker of something that felt dangerously like hope. Outside her window, the last light of day painted the western sky in shades of amber and gold. In the street below, she could make out Finn's figure as he walked toward his office, his shoulders straight and his stride purposeful. "Then she'll feast for a lifetime with me," he had said. The words echoed in her mind as she prepared for bed, a promise she didn't dare believe but couldn't quite dismiss. For the first time in months, Penelope slept without fear. Morning light streamed through the window, waking Penelope from the deepest sleep she'd had in months. For a disorienting moment, she didn't recognize her surroundings. Then memory flooded back the trading post, her uncle's betrayal, the marshal's intervention, and the unexpected sanctuary of the Silver Lark. She dressed quickly in the same worn dress she'd worn the day before, smoothing the wrinkles as best she could. The sounds of activity drifted up from below: voices, the clatter of dishes, the appetizing aroma of coffee and frying bacon. When she descended the stairs, she found the dining room occupied by several people: an older gentleman with spectacles and a neat white beard, a young couple who looked to be traveling through, and a woman in her 30s wearing a schoolteacher's practical attire. Fiona emerged from the kitchen balancing plates of food. "Ah, Penelope, good morning. Come help me serve breakfast and then you'll join us." Grateful for the direction, Penelope followed her into the kitchen, where she was handed 2 plates heaped with eggs, bacon, and johnnycakes drizzled with maple syrup. "These go to Dr. Wilson, that's the gentleman with the beard, and Miss Tillman, our school teacher," Fiona instructed. "I'll introduce you properly once everyone's fed." By the time all the boarders had been served and Penelope had taken a seat with her own plate, she had learned that Dr. Wilson had been in Silver Creek for 15 years, Miss Tillman for 3, and the young couple, the Palmers, were on their way to Oregon to start a new life. "And this is Penelope Lawson," Fiona announced. "She'll be helping me run the place, so you'll be seeing plenty of her from now on." The boarders welcomed her with varying degrees of warmth, from Dr. Wilson's courtly nod to Mrs. Palmer's enthusiastic questions about where Penelope had come from. "She's from the eastern part of the territory," Finn's voice came from the doorway, saving Penelope from having to construct a palatable version of her circumstances. He stood there in his marshal's attire, looking more rested than he had the previous evening. "Good morning, everyone." "Marshal Hayes," Dr. Wilson greeted him. "Coming for breakfast or business?" "A bit of both," Finn replied, accepting the cup of coffee Fiona pressed into his hands. "Thought I'd let Miss Lawson know that I sent a telegraph to the circuit judge about her situation. He'll be through town next month and can formalize her separation from her uncle's guardianship, if that's what she wants." Penelope's hand froze halfway to her mouth. I didn't realize that was possible." Finn took a seat beside her. "You're of age, Miss Lawson. Your uncle has no legal right to you, regardless of what he might have claimed. The judge can make that official just to prevent any future complications." The simple declaration of her autonomy, something she had taken for granted until her parents' deaths had left her dependent on her uncle's dubious charity, brought a lump to her throat. "Thank you," she managed. After breakfast, as the boarders dispersed to their daily activities, Fiona put Penelope to work helping with the washing up. "My brother seems to have taken quite an interest in your welfare," Fiona commented as they worked side by side, Penelope washing while Fiona dried. "He's been very kind," Penelope replied carefully, Fiona's hands stilled on the dish she was drying. "Finn has always had a soft spot for those in need, but there's something different about how he looks at you." Penelope felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We only just met yesterday." "Sometimes that's all it takes," Fiona said with a knowing smile. "Our mother used to say she knew our father was the one the moment he walked into her father's store asking for directions. I'm not looking for, that is, I can't even think about." Penelope stumbled over her words. Fiona patted her hand. "Of course not, dear. You've been through a terrible ordeal. I'm just making an observation." The morning passed in a blur of domestic tasks: changing bedding, sweeping floors, learning the routines of the boarding house. Fiona was an exacting but patient teacher, showing Penelope how she liked things done without making her feel inadequate when she made mistakes. By midday, Penelope had earned a few hours of free time. Fiona pressed a small amount of money into her hand. "Go explore the town a bit. You'll need some new clothes if you're staying, and Martha at the general store is expecting you." "But I can't accept. It's an advance on your wages," Fiona insisted. "And don't argue with me about wages either. If you're working here, you're getting paid. That's non-negotiable." The main street of Silver Creek was bustling with activity as Penelope made her way to the general store. Wagons rumbled past, cowboys tipped their hats as she walked by, and children darted between buildings in games of tag, their laughter a bright counterpoint to the serious business being conducted around them. The general store's bell tinkled as Penelope entered, announcing her arrival to the plump woman arranging bolts of fabric near the front counter. "You must be Penelope," the woman said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Fiona sent word you'd be coming by. I'm Martha Goodwin. My husband and I run the store." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Goodwin," Penelope replied, somewhat overwhelmed by the array of goods crammed into the shop, everything from foodstuffs to hardware to clothing and fabric. "Now then, let's get you fixed up with some essentials," Martha said, guiding Penelope toward the ready-made dresses at the back of the store. "Fiona mentioned you came with just the clothes on your back, poor dear." An hour later, Penelope left the store with a package containing 2 new dresses, undergarments, a nightgown, and various toiletries. Martha had been surprisingly generous, stretching Fiona's advance further than Penelope would have thought possible. As she turned to head back to the boarding house, she nearly collided with a broad chest. "Careful there, Miss Lawson," Finn said, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Marshall Hayes," she responded, flustered by his sudden appearance. "I didn't see you." "Just finished my midday rounds," he explained. "I see Martha took good care of you." Penelope nodded, adjusting her package. "Everyone in town has been very kind. I don't know how to repay such generosity." "No need to repay kindness," Finn said, falling into step beside her as she continued toward the boarding house. "That's not how it works. In my experience, everything has a price," she countered softly. Finn was quiet for a few paces. "Not everything," he finally said. "Some things are freely given, with no expectation of return." The sincerity in his voice made her glance up at him. In the bright light of day, she could better appreciate the details of his appearance, the laugh lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, the careful way he kept his body angled to give her space, the clean but work-worn hands that spoke of a man who didn't hesitate to do what needed doing. "Like what you did for me yesterday?" she asked. "That wasn't charity, Miss Lawson, that was justice." "Penelope," she said impulsively. "Please call me Penelope." A smile spread slowly across his face, transforming his serious expression. "Penelope, then. And I'm Finn when I'm not on official business." They walked in companionable silence the rest of the way to the boarding house, where Finn tipped his hat and continued on to his office. Penelope watched him go, a strange flutter in her chest that she told herself was simply gratitude for his kindness. It wasn't until she was hanging her new dresses in the small wardrobe in her room that she realized she'd been smiling the entire walk back. The next 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that gradually became familiar to Penelope. Mornings were devoted to helping Fiona prepare and serve breakfast, followed by cleaning the boarders' rooms and doing laundry. Afternoons were often less structured. Sometimes she would help prepare dinner. Other times Fiona would send her on errands around town or give her free time to explore her new surroundings. Silver Creek revealed itself to her bit by bit, like a shy creature emerging from hiding. She learned which shops were owned by which families, where to find the freshest produce, and which paths along the creek offered the most shade on hot afternoons. She also learned more about Finn Hayes. Not just from their increasingly frequent encounters, he seemed to find reasons to stop by the boarding house daily, but from the way the townspeople spoke about him. He had come to Silver Creek 5 years earlier, when the previous marshal had been killed in a shootout with cattle rustlers. Despite his relatively young age, just 28, he had quickly established himself as a fair but firm enforcer of the law. The Hayes siblings were a godsend to this town, Dr. Wilson told her one evening as she served his dinner. Finn brought order, and Fiona brought civilization. The Silver Lark used to be a run-down saloon before she transformed it. What no one could tell her was why Finn had taken such a personal interest in her situation. His daily visits had become a highlight of her routine, bringing with them conversations that ranged from the mundane to the philosophical. He seemed genuinely interested in her thoughts and experiences, never dismissing her opinions as her uncle had always done. On a particularly warm afternoon in late June, Penelope was sitting on the boarding house's back porch, shelling peas for dinner and enjoying the rare moment of solitude when Finn appeared around the corner of the building. "Afternoon, Penelope," he greeted her, removing his hat as he approached. "Fiona working you hard as usual, I see." "I don't mind," she replied, making room for him on the bench beside her. "It feels good to be useful." He settled next to her, picking up a handful of peas to help with the shelling. His large hands looked incongruous performing such a domestic task, but moved with surprising deftness. "You've settled in well here," he observed. "The whole town's talking about how Fiona's cooking has improved since you arrived," Penelope laughed. "That's kind of them to say, though Fiona is a perfectly good cook on her own." "Maybe, but everyone agrees your biscuits are the lightest in the territory." They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the soft pop of peas being freed from their shells and the distant noises of the town going about its business. "I've been meaning to ask you," Finn said eventually, "what your plans are for the future." "The circuit judge will be here in another 2 weeks," Penelope's hands stilled. "I haven't thought much beyond each day, to be honest. You could stay here," he suggested, his tone carefully casual. "Fiona loves having you and you've made friends in town." "I have, haven't I?" She mused, somewhat surprised by the realization. Martha Goodwin at the general store, Miss Tillman the schoolteacher, even old Dr. Wilson had all shown her kindness and acceptance she hadn't experienced since her parents' deaths. "More than you realize," Finn confirmed. "In fact, I had a thought. The town council's been talking about opening a proper restaurant. Silver Creek's growing, and the miners and cowboys passing through need somewhere besides the saloons to eat. Someone with your cooking skills could make a real success of such a venture." Penelope stared at him. "Me? Run a restaurant, but I don't have any money to start such a business. The town would provide the building. The old assayer's office has been sitting empty for months. As for the rest, I might be able to help with that." "Why would you do that?" she asked, the question that had been building in her for weeks finally spilling out. "Why have you done any of this for me?" Finn set aside the pea pods and turned to face her fully. "At first, it was because what I saw in that trading post wasn't right, and fixing wrongs is my job. But since then," he paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Since then, it's because I've come to care for you, Penelope, more than I probably should, given the circumstances." Her heart hammered in her chest. "What are you saying, Finn?" "I'm saying that I meant what I told you that first day, about feasting for a lifetime." His eyes, serious and sincere, held hers. "Not just with food, but with opportunity, respect, friendship, and, maybe someday, if you were willing, something more." Penelope's breath caught in her throat. In the short time she'd known him, Finn Hayes had shown her more consideration and respect than any man in her life, save her father. The thought that he might want more than friendship both thrilled and terrified her. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "You don't have to say anything now," he assured her. "I know it's too soon and you're still finding your footing here. I just wanted you to know where I stand, and that whatever you decide about staying in Silver Creek, I'll support you." Before she could respond, Fiona's voice called from inside the house, summoning her to help with dinner preparations. "I should go," Penelope said, gathering the bowl of shelled peas. Finn nodded, rising to his feet. "Think about the restaurant. It's a real opportunity, regardless of other considerations." As she hurried inside, Penelope's mind whirled with possibilities she had never allowed herself to contemplate before. A business of her own. A place in this community. And Finn Hayes looking at her not with pity, but with something far more dangerous to her carefully guarded heart. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, the future stretched before her not as a void to be feared, but as a horizon bright with promise. The arrival of Judge Harrison Crawford brought an air of formality to Silver Creek. The circuit judge traveled throughout the territory dispensing justice, where no permanent court existed, and his presence transformed the town's modest meeting hall into an impromptu courthouse. Penelope stood before the judge, her hands clasped tightly to prevent them from trembling. Finn stood beside her in his official capacity, while several townspeople, including Fiona, Dr. Wilson, and the Goodwins, sat in the audience as witnesses to the proceedings. "Miss Lawson," Judge Crawford said, peering at her over half-moon spectacles, "Marshal Hayes has outlined your situation to me, and I've reviewed the relevant documentation. Do you wish to be legally emancipated from any guardianship claim your uncle might assert?" "I do, Your Honor," she replied, her voice stronger than she expected. The judge nodded. "Given that you are of legal age and clearly capable of supporting yourself, as attested by these witnesses, I see no reason to deny this petition." He signed the document before him with a flourish. "Let it be recorded that Penelope Lawson is hereby declared a free and independent woman, entitled to all rights and responsibilities thereof." A ripple of approval went through the assembled witnesses. Penelope felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't fully acknowledged until this moment. "Thank you, Your Honor," she said. As they left the meeting hall, Finn touched her elbow lightly. "Congratulations. How does it feel to be officially free?" "Overwhelming," she admitted. "In a good way. We should celebrate," Fiona declared, joining them. "I've prepared a special dinner for tonight." "Actually," Finn said, "if Penelope is agreeable, I'd like to show her something first." Curiosity piqued, Penelope nodded her consent, and Finn led her down the main street toward the abandoned assayer's office he had mentioned 2 weeks earlier. The building sat at a prime location at the corner of Main Street and River Road, its large windows dusty but intact, its structure solid despite the peeling paint. "The town council approved the restaurant proposal yesterday," Finn told her as they approached. "They're offering a 5-year lease with very favorable terms to whoever takes it on." "And you still think that should be me?" Penelope asked, a mixture of excitement and trepidation bubbling within her. "I do," he affirmed, "but don't just take my word for it. Come inside." He produced a key and unlocked the front door, ushering her into a spacious room filled with afternoon sunlight. The assayer's counter and equipment had been removed, leaving an open space that could easily accommodate a dozen tables. "There's a good-sized kitchen in the back," Finn explained, leading her through the building, "and living quarters upstairs that could be fixed up nicely." Penelope walked slowly through the rooms, her mind racing with possibilities. She could almost see at tables with checkered cloths, the aroma of fresh bread and hearty stews, a place where travelers and townspeople alike could gather for a good meal and company. It would take a lot of work, she mused, and money for furnishings, supplies, staff. "The bank is prepared to extend a loan for the startup costs," Finn said. "Based on your demonstrated skills and character references from myself, Fiona, and others in town." Penelope turned to face him, suspicions suddenly flaring. "Have you been planning this all along?" "Since the day you found me at the trading post," Finn's expression grew serious. "No, Penelope, I didn't have any plan that day beyond stopping something wrong from happening. The restaurant idea only came up after folks started raving about your cooking at the boarding house." She studied his face, finding only sincerity there. "I've never run a business before. What if I fail?" "Then you pick yourself up and try something else," he said simply. "But I don't think you will fail. You're resourceful, hardworking, and talented, and you wouldn't be doing it alone." "You mean the town would support it?" "Yes," he agreed, "and I would support you, in whatever capacity you'll have me." There it was again, that hint of something more that he'd first suggested 2 weeks ago. Penelope had thought about little else since, examining her growing feelings for Finn Hayes with both hope and caution. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course," he nodded. "Take all the time you need. The opportunity will still be here." As they walked back toward the boarding house for Fiona's celebration dinner, Penelope's mind raced with possibilities. The restaurant represented more than just a business venture. It was a chance to build something of her own, to truly put down roots in Silver Creek. And Finn's offer of support, with its careful hint of deeper feelings, presented another kind of opportunity altogether. One that frightened and thrilled her in equal measure. That night, as she lay in bed listening to the distant piano music from the saloon down the street, Penelope made her decision. Silver Creek had offered her sanctuary when she needed it most. Now it was offering her a future, All she had to do was be brave enough to claim it. The following morning, she sought out Finn at his office. "I've decided to accept the restaurant proposal," she told him without preamble, "and the bank loan." The smile that spread across his face warmed her from the inside out. "That's wonderful news, Penelope. The town will be thrilled." "There's something else," she continued, summoning her courage. "I've been thinking about what you said, about supporting me in whatever capacity I'll have you." Finn's expression grew serious, his full attention focused on her in a way that made her heart race. "And what have you decided?" "That I'd like to find out what something more might look like, between us." The words came out in a rush and heat flooded her cheeks. For a moment, Finn simply looked at her, his eyes filled with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Then he stepped around his desk to stand before her, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes. "I'd like that too," he said softly. "Very much." He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he entwined his fingers with hers. The simple contact sent a shiver up her arm. "May I call on you properly, Penelope Lawson? Court you as you deserve to be courted," the formality of the request, so at odds with the unconventional beginning of their acquaintance, brought a smile to her lips. "Yes, Finn Hayes, you may." The renovation of the soon-to-be-named Copper Kettle restaurant began the very next day. The entire town seemed to rally behind the project, with men volunteering labor and women offering furnishings, recipes, and advice in equal measure. Penelope threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction from the giddy nervousness that overtook her whenever she thought about her changing relationship with Finn. True to his word, he began courting her with a careful respect that made her previous experiences with men seem even more shameful by comparison. Their courtship unfolded alongside the transformation of the restaurant. Finn would appear at the end of a long day of cleaning and painting to escort her on walks along the creek, where they talked of their childhoods, their dreams, and the small details that made up their lives. He brought her wildflowers picked from the prairie and books borrowed from the small town library to share his favorite stories. One particularly memorable evening, a month after work on the restaurant began, Finn arrived at the boarding house dressed in his Sunday best. "I thought we might do something special tonight," he explained when Penelope commented on his appearance. "If you're not too tired from working all day." "I'm never too tired for you," she replied honestly, earning a smile that made her knees weak. He led her not toward their usual walking path, but to the livery stable, where a buggy waited, already hitched to his favorite mare. "Where are we going?" she asked as he helped her up to the seat. "You'll see," he replied mysteriously, taking the reins. They drove out of town as the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, following a narrow track that wound through stands of cottonwood trees and across open meadows dotted with wildflowers. After about 20 minutes, they crested a small rise to reveal a breathtaking vista of the valley below, with Silver Creek nestled among the rolling hills and the distant mountains purple against the darkening sky. "This is beautiful," Penelope breathed, taking in the panoramic view. Finn halted the buggy in a small clearing and came around to help her down. To her surprise, a blanket had already been spread on the ground with a picnic basket waiting. "You planned all this?" she asked, delighted by the thoughtfulness. "With some help from Fiona," he admitted, guiding her to the blanket. "I wanted our first real outing to be memorable." The picnic basket yielded cold chicken, freshly baked bread, summer berries, and a bottle of wine luxuries rarely seen in frontier towns. "This must have cost a fortune," she protested. "Some things are worth spending on," he replied simply. As they ate and talked, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Penelope felt a contentment she hadn't experienced since before her parents' deaths. The weight of grief and fear that had been her constant companion for so long seemed to lift in Finn's presence, replaced by a cautious joy. When the meal was finished and twilight had deepened around them, Finn turned to face her fully. "Penelope," he began, his voice carrying an undercurrent of emotion that made her heart quicken, "these past weeks have been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," she admitted softly. "When I found you at that trading post, I acted out of duty and basic human decency. I never expected that day to change my life. He reached for her hand. But you have. Finn, let me finish, he requested gently. I know it hasn't been long, and I know you're just beginning to build a new life here. I don't want to rush you or pressure you. But I need you to know that my feelings for you are real and growing stronger every day. He shifted position to kneel before her, still holding her hand. I'm not asking for any promises now. I just want you to know that, whenever you're ready, whether that's months or years from now, I'll be here, hoping for a chance to make you as happy as you've made me. Tears welled in Penelope's eyes, not of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. In the short time she'd known him, Finn Hayes had shown her what it meant to be truly respected, valued, and cherished. I don't need months or years, she whispered. I already know how I feel about you. Hope flared in his eyes, and how's that? Instead of answering with words, Penelope leaned forward and pressed her lips to his in a gentle, tentative kiss. It was her first, a fact she was suddenly self-conscious about, but Finn responded with such tenderness that her anxiety melted away when they parted. His eyes searched hers. Was that your answer? She nodded, a smile blooming on her face. Yes, that was my answer. His answering smile was radiant in the gathering darkness. In that case, I have something else to ask you. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object that caught the last light of day, a simple ring with a modest sapphire that matched the blue in his gray eyes. This was my mother's, he explained. Fiona insisted I should have it, for when I found the right woman to give it to. Penelope's breath caught in her throat as understanding dawned. I know it's soon, Finn continued, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his expression. And I'll understand if you need more time. But I love you, Penelope Lawson, and I want to spend the rest of my life showing you just how much. Will you marry me? Time seemed to stand still as Penelope looked at the man kneeling before her, the man who had rescued her from desperation, who had believed in her abilities, who had courted her with patience and respect, and who now offered her his heart without reservation. The answer came from the deepest part of her soul, certain and clear. Yes, she said, her voice breaking with emotion. Yes, I will marry you, Finn Hayes. As he slipped the ring onto her finger and gathered her into his arms for another kiss, Penelope thought of his words on that fateful day at the trading post. Then she'll feast for a lifetime with me. In that moment, with the first stars appearing in the darkening sky above them, she knew with absolute certainty that it had been a promise he intended to keep. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire, meeting with approval from virtually everyone in town. Fiona was especially jubilant, having secretly hoped for this outcome since the day Finn had brought Penelope to the boarding house. I knew it from the start, she told them over breakfast the morning after their engagement. The way he looked at you, I've never seen my brother so smitten. You could have mentioned that to me, Penelope teased, still marveling at the ring on her finger. And ruin all the fun of watching you two figure it out yourselves, Fiona laughed. Not a chance. With their engagement established, work on the copper kettle took on new significance. The restaurant would not only be Penelope's business, but the foundation of their shared future. Finn threw himself into the renovation with renewed vigor, spending every free moment helping with the construction of tables and chairs, the installation of a proper stove, and countless other tasks. By mid-August, just 2 months after Judge Crawford had officially emancipated Penelope, the copper kettle was ready to open. The once abandoned assayer's office had been transformed into a warm, inviting space with polished wooden floors, gingham curtains at the windows, and tables that could seat up to 30 patrons. The kitchen gleamed with new equipment purchased with the bank loan, and the menu carefully planned to showcase Penelope's best recipes, while using ingredients readily available on the frontier, was proudly displayed on a chalkboard by the entrance. On opening day, it seemed the entire population of Silver Creek turned out to support the new establishment. Penelope had hired 2 local girls as waitresses and a young man fresh from back east to help in the kitchen. But even with the extra hands, they were overwhelmed by the enthusiastic response. Finn arrived just as the dinner rush was beginning to ebb, looking apologetic. Sorry I couldn't be here earlier, Had to ride out to the Thompson Place dispute over some missing cattle. "You're here now," Penelope said, rising on tiptoes to kiss his cheek. "Are you hungry?" "Starving," he admitted, "and eager to see how your first day went." She led him to a small table in the corner reserved for the owner and her guests, signaling to one of the waitresses to bring Finn a plate of the day's special beef stew with fresh baked bread and apple pie for dessert. "It was incredible," she told him as he ate. "We ran out of pie by noon, and Martha Goodwin had to send over extra flour because we needed to bake more bread." "I'm not surprised," Finn said between bites. "This stew alone would bring people back. You've got a real gift, Penelope." His praise warmed her more than any compliment from the other patrons. "We're going to need to expand the menu if this keeps up. Maybe add some breakfast dishes for the early risers." They discussed plans for the restaurant's future as the last customers departed and the staff began cleaning up. By the time the copper kettle was locked up for the night, Penelope was exhausted but exhilarated by the success of her first day as a business owner. Finn walked her back to the boarding house, where she would continue to live until their wedding, scheduled for the first weekend in October. "You did it," he said as they paused on the porch. "You've created something wonderful. We did it," she corrected him. "I couldn't have done any of this without you," he smiled, the moonlight silvering his features. "You could have, you know. You're stronger than you give yourself credit for." "Maybe," she allowed, "but I'm glad I didn't have to." As September rolled into October, preparations for the wedding became the town's primary focus after the excitement of the Copper Kettle's successful opening. The small church at the end of Main Street was decorated with autumn wildflowers and ribbons, and every available hand contributed to the celebration. Martha Goodwin and several other women helped Penelope sew a wedding dress of ivory satin, simple but elegant. Fiona organized the wedding feast to be held at the restaurant after the ceremony. Even crusty old Dr. Wilson got involved, offering his prized roses for Penelope's bouquet. The day before the wedding, as Penelope was closing the restaurant early to prepare for the rehearsal, an unexpected visitor arrived. The man who stepped through the door was vaguely familiar, though it took her a moment to place him. Thomas Green, a rancher who occasionally came to town for supplies. "Miss Lawson," he greeted her, removing his hat. "Might I have a word?" "Of course, Mr. Green," she replied, gesturing to a table. "Would you like some coffee? We're closed for food, but no, thank you," he interrupted. "I won't take much of your time. I just thought you should know your Uncle Silas is in town." The news hit her like a physical blow. "What?" "Saw him at the saloon about an hour ago," Green confirmed, drunk and ranting about his ungrateful niece who ran off and got above herself. Penelope's hands gripped the back of a chair to steady herself. "Did he say what he wants?" "Money, from what I gathered." "Seems he's heard about your restaurant and figures you owe him something for raising you." Green's expression was sympathetic. "Thought you should know so it doesn't catch you by surprise, especially with the wedding tomorrow." "Thank you for telling me," she managed. "If you'll excuse me, I need to find Marshall Hayes." She didn't have to look far. Finn arrived at the restaurant just as Green was leaving, his expression darkening as the rancher murmured something to him on his way out. "Silas is in town," Finn said without preamble, crossing the room to Penelope. "Are you all right?" "Just shocked," she admitted. "I never thought he'd come here." "I'll deal with him," Finn promised, his jaw set in a determined line. "He has no claim on you, legal or moral." "I know that," she said, touching his arm to calm him. "But I should be there. Whatever he wants to say, I need to hear it. I need to face him." Finn studied her for a long moment before nodding. "All right, but not alone. I'm coming with you." They found Silas Lawson at the Silver Dollar Saloon, slouched over a whiskey at a corner table, looking considerably worse for wear than when Penelope had last seen him. His clothes were threadbare, his face gaunt beneath several days' growth of beard, and his eyes bloodshot from drink. "Well, look who it is," he slurred as they approached. "The ungrateful brat and her fancy lawman." "You're drunk, Silas," Finn stated flatly, "and you're not welcome in Silver Creek if you've come to make trouble." Silas sneered. "Just came to congratulate my niece on her good fortune. Heard she's got herself a restaurant and a marshal to boot. Pretty good for a girl I couldn't even get $3 for." Penelope flinched at the crude reminder, but Finn's steady presence beside her gave her courage. "What do you want, uncle?" "What any loving relative would want to share in your good fortune." Silas's smile was an ugly thing. "Seems to me you owe me for all those years I put a roof over your head and food in your belly." "I owe you nothing," Penelope said, her voice stronger than she expected. "You sold me for a meal." "Whatever obligation might have existed between us ended that day." "You ungrateful, choose your next words very carefully," Finn interrupted, his hand resting casually on his holstered pistol. "That's my fiancée you're speaking to." Silas's watery eyes darted between them, calculating despite his drunkenness. "Fine. How about this? Give me enough money to get a fresh start somewhere else and you'll never see me again." "Why should we believe that?" Finn asked. "Because my ranch is gone," Silas admitted bitterly. "Bank took it last month. I've got nothing left." Penelope felt a complex mix of emotions: pity for the broken man before her, anger at his attempt to manipulate her, and a strange sense of closure. Her uncle had been the last tie to her old life, a life marked by grief and desperation. Cutting that final thread would truly free her to embrace her future with Finn. "I'll give you enough for a ticket to Denver and 2 weeks' lodging," she said after a moment's consideration, "in exchange for your written promise never to return to Silver Creek or make any claim against me." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Written promise, drawn up by Judge Crawford, who's in town for our wedding," Finn explained. "Legally binding." After a tense silence, Silas nodded. "Fine, better than nothing." The matter was settled the next morning, with Judge Crawford witnessing Silas's signature on a document relinquishing any claim to Penelope or her property. The money, far more generous than Silas deserved, was placed in the judge's keeping, to be released only when Silas boarded the eastbound stage. "Are you sure about this?" Finn asked as they watched Silas slouch out of the judge's temporary office. "Yes," Penelope said firmly. "I don't want anything from my old life casting a shadow on our new one. This way we can start fresh." Finn's expression softened as he looked at her. "You're an extraordinary woman, Penelope Lawson. And in a few hours, I'll be the luckiest man in the territory when you become Penelope Hayes." The wedding, despite the unexpected drama of Silas's appearance, proceeded exactly as planned. The small church overflowed with well-wishers as Penelope walked down the aisle on Dr. Wilson's arm, the old physician having volunteered to give her away in the absence of her father. Finn waited at the altar, his eyes never leaving hers as she approached. In that moment, the journey that had brought them together from the desperate scene at the trading post to this day of joy and promise seemed both miraculous and inevitable. "Dearly beloved," the Reverend began, his voice carrying through the hushed church, "we are gathered here today to join this man and this woman in holy matrimony." The ceremony was simple but deeply moving, with traditional vows exchanged in voices steady with conviction. When Finn slipped a gold band onto her finger to join her mother's sapphire ring, Penelope felt as though her heart might burst with happiness. "I now pronounce you man and wife," the Reverend declared. "You may kiss your bride." The kiss they shared was sweet and reverent, a promise sealed before their community. As they turned to face the congregation as Mr. and Mrs. Hayes, the applause that erupted was deafening. The celebration that followed at the Copper Kettle lasted well into the night, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the territory. Finn and Penelope moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from what seemed like every resident of Silver Creek and the surrounding area. As the evening wound down, Finn led Penelope away from the festivities and toward their new home, the newly renovated apartment above the restaurant, where they would begin their life together. "Happy, Mrs. Hayes?" he asked as they crossed the threshold, his arms sweeping her up in the traditional manner. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied honestly, her arms around his neck. He set her down gently in the center of their new home, simple but comfortable furnishings illuminated by the soft glow of lamplight. "Do you remember what I said to you that first day?" he asked, his hands gentle on her waist. "Every word," she whispered. "They sold you for one meal, but with me you'll feast for a lifetime." "I meant it then," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "And I mean it now. Not just food for your body, but love for your heart, respect for your mind, and partnership for your soul. That's my promise to you, Penelope Hayes, today and every day for the rest of our lives." As she rose on tiptoes to kiss her husband, her protector, her partner, her love, Penelope knew with absolute certainty that this was a promise Finn would keep, just as faithfully as he had kept every promise since the day he had rescued her from despair and shown her a future brighter than she had dared to imagine. The first year of their marriage passed in a blur of hard work and happiness. The copper kettle flourished under Penelope's management, becoming not just a profitable business but the heart of Silver Creek's community. Townsfolk gathered there not only for meals but to share news, celebrate special occasions, and weather hardships together. Finn continued his duties as marshal, maintaining order in a town growing steadily as the railroad's approach brought new settlers and opportunities to the region. The respect he commanded made his job easier than it might have been in other frontier communities, though occasional troubles, drunken cowboys, claim disputes, and the rare more serious crime kept him busy. Their home above the restaurant became a haven, filled with simple comforts and the warmth of their deepening love. Each evening, after the restaurant closed and Finn completed his final rounds, they would sit together by the stove, sharing the details of their day and making plans for their future. It was during one such evening in late summer, as their first wedding anniversary approached, that Penelope shared the news she had been suspecting for several weeks. "Finn," she said, her hand finding his across the table, "I visited Dr. Wilson today." His brow furrowed with immediate concern. "Are you ill? You've been tired lately, but I thought it was just the extra work at the restaurant." "Not ill," she assured him, a smile spreading across her face. "Just expecting. We're going to have a baby, Finn, in early spring, according to the doctor." For a moment, Finn simply stared at her, processing her words. Then his face transformed with a joy so pure it brought tears to her eyes. "A baby," he whispered, rising from his chair to kneel beside hers, his hands gentle on her still flat stomach. "Our baby. Are you happy?" She asked, though his expression left little doubt. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," he replied, pulling her into a gentle embrace. "I love you so much, Penelope, both of you." The news of their expected child spread through Silver Creek, almost as quickly as the news of their engagement had a year earlier. The town, having adopted Penelope as one of their own from her first days there, rallied around the expectant parents with the same enthusiasm they showed for all major life events in their close-knit community. Martha Goodwin organized a group of women to sew baby clothes and blankets. Dr. Wilson, though nearing retirement, promised to attend the birth personally. Fiona, ecstatic at the prospect of becoming an aunt, began knitting tiny booties and caps with a dedication that made Penelope laugh. "The baby won't need 17 pairs of booties," she told her sister-in-law as Fiona presented yet another completed set. "Maybe not," Fiona conceded, "but I need to make them. It gives me something to do with all this excitement." As Penelope's pregnancy progressed, she was forced to reduce her hours at the restaurant, relying more heavily on the staff she had carefully trained. Finn became even more protective, checking on her between his rounds and insisting she rest whenever possible. "I'm pregnant, not made of glass," she protested one afternoon when he came home early to find her rearranging the nursery they were preparing in the small second bedroom of their apartment. "Humor me," he requested, gently guiding her to a chair. "It's my first time being an expectant father." She softened at his concern. "And you're doing wonderfully at it, but truly, Finn, I'm fine, better than fine, I've never been happier." It was true. Despite the physical discomforts of pregnancy and the worries that naturally accompanied impending parenthood, Penelope had never felt more fulfilled. The life she and Finn had built together, their home, the restaurant, their place in the community. And now the child they had created was beyond anything she could have imagined that desperate day at the trading post. Winter arrived with unusual severity that year, blanketing Silver Creek in snow and bringing bitter cold that tested even the hardiest residents. Penelope, in her 6th month of pregnancy, found the weather particularly challenging, confined more often than not to the apartment above the restaurant. Finn worried about her isolation, especially as Christmas approached. "You need something to lift your spirits," he told her one evening as they sat by the fire. "Something special." "I have everything I need right here," she assured him, her hand resting on her rounded belly. "You and this little one are all the Christmas gift I could ask for." Nevertheless, on Christmas morning, Penelope awoke to find Finn gone from their bed and the enticing aroma of coffee and cinnamon filling the apartment. Following her nose to the kitchen, she found him standing by the stove, a proud smile on his face. "Merry Christmas," he greeted her, gesturing to the table where a feast awaited fresh bread, preserves, eggs, and what looked like authentic Southern grits, a rare luxury in Montana territory. "How did you manage all this?" she asked, amazed at the spread. "I had help," he admitted. "Fiona did the baking yesterday, and the grits came all the way from St. Louis on the last supply wagon before the snow. I've been hiding them for weeks." Penelope felt tears well in her eyes, a common occurrence in her pregnant state, much to her chagrin. "It's wonderful, Finn, thank you." "That's not all," he said, reaching into his pocket to produce a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a red ribbon. "This is for you." Inside the package, Penelope found a locket of polished silver, simple but exquisitely crafted. When she opened it, she discovered a tiny painting on one side, a perfect miniature of Finn with the other side left empty. "For the baby," Finn explained, his voice gentle. "Once he or she arrives, we can add their likeness. I thought you might want to keep us both close to your heart." "It's perfect," Penelope whispered, deeply moved by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "I'll treasure it always." She rose to retrieve his gift from its hiding place in the bedroom, a new leather-bound journal to replace the one he used for official martial business, which was nearly full, and a silver pen engraved with his initials. "So you can record our child's milestones," she explained as he examined the gifts with appreciation, "and perhaps your thoughts for him or her to read someday." Their Christmas day continued with visits from friends bringing gifts and good wishes. Fiona, of course, but also Dr. Wilson, the Goodwins, and many others who had become like family in the 2 years since Penelope had arrived in Silver Creek. As the day drew to a close and they sat together by the fire, Penelope felt the baby move within her, a strong kick that made her smile. "Active tonight," Finn observed, his hand joining hers on her belly to feel the movement. "Just reminding us that next Christmas will be even more special," she replied, leaning against his shoulder. Finn pressed a kiss to her temple. "Every day with you is special, Penelope. From the first to the last, and all the ones in between." The remainder of the winter passed slowly, the snow and cold keeping most of the town's residents close to home. For Penelope, increasingly uncomfortable in her advancing pregnancy, the enforced rest was probably a blessing, though she chafed at the restrictions. By March, as the first signs of spring began to appear, she was more than ready for the baby's arrival. Dr. Wilson had been stopping by regularly to check on her progress, assuring both Penelope and Finn that everything was proceeding normally. "Any day now," he told them during his visit in the first week of April. "The baby has dropped into position, and you're showing all the signs of imminent labor." "How will I know when it's starting?" Penelope asked, nervous despite the months of preparation and advice from the women of Silver Creek. Dr. Wilson patted her hand. "You'll know, my dear, and when you do, send for me immediately. First babies often take their time, but I want to be here from the beginning." The doctor's prediction proved accurate. 2 days later, in the early hours of the morning, Penelope woke to a cramping pain that wrapped around her lower back and tightened across her abdomen. "Finn," she whispered, shaking his shoulder. "I think it's time." He was instantly alert, years of responding to emergencies as a marshal serving him well in this most personal crisis. With remarkable calm, he helped her into a comfortable position, tucked extra pillows around her, and sent the night cook from the restaurant to fetch Dr. Wilson and Fiona. The labor progressed steadily throughout the morning and into the afternoon. Fiona and Martha Goodwin took turns sitting with Penelope, wiping her brow, offering encouragement, and occasionally shooing an anxious Finn from the room to catch his breath. "He's wearing a path in the floorboards," Fiona reported during one of her breaks, her attempt at humor barely masking her own concern as Penelope's labor intensified. By late afternoon, Dr. Wilson declared that the time had come to begin pushing. Finn, refusing to be excluded any longer, took his place behind Penelope, supporting her back and whispering encouragement in her ear. "You can do this," he told her as another contraction built. "You're the strongest person I know, Penelope Hayes." Drawing strength from his unwavering faith in her, Penelope bore down with the next wave of pain, and the next, and the next. The sun was setting, painting the bedroom in shades of gold when their child finally made her entrance into the world with a lusty cry that filled the room. "A girl, doctor," Wilson announced, his professional demeanor briefly giving way to a broad smile. "And a fine, healthy one at that." Tears streamed down Penelope's face as the doctor placed the swaddled infant in her arms. Tiny, perfect features, a button nose, rosebud mouth, and a shock of dark hair like her father's greeted her as the baby blinked up at her new parents. "She's beautiful," Finn whispered, his voice thick with emotion as he gently touched his daughter's cheek. "Just like her mother." "What will you name her?" Fiona asked, wiping away her own tears of joy. Penelope and Finn exchanged a glance, having discussed names extensively over the past months. "Faith," Penelope said softly. "Faith Elizabeth Hayes." "For the faith that brought us together," Finn explained, "and the faith we have in the future we'll build with her." As the first stars appeared in the darkening sky outside their window, the new family shared a moment of profound contentment. Penelope, exhausted but exhilarated, looked from her daughter to her husband, marveling at the journey that had brought her to this moment of perfect happiness. From being valued so little that she was sold for a single meal, she had found her way to a life overflowing with love, purpose, and now the miracle of new life. Finn had kept his promise. She was feasting, not just on physical sustenance but on all the richness life had to offer. "I love you," she told him, her eyes meeting his over their daughter's head. "Both of you, more than I can possibly express." "And we love you," he replied, his hand covering hers where it cradled their child. "Today, tomorrow, and all the days to come." Outside their window, Silver Creek settled into evening routines, lamps being lit, suppers being served, conversations flowing in homes and businesses throughout the town. Life continued its eternal cycle of renewal and growth, just as it had for countless generations before, and would for countless more to come. But in that moment, in the small apartment above the Copper Kettle restaurant, a new chapter was beginning, not just for Penelope, Finn, and little Faith, but for the community that had embraced them and become their extended family. The story that had begun with desperation at a frontier trading post had transformed into one of hope, love, and the promise of a future filled with possibilities. And as Penelope drifted towards sleep, her daughter secure in her arms and her husband keeping watch beside them, she knew with absolute certainty that this was only the beginning of their feast of a lifetime together. 5 years later, the Copper Kettle restaurant remained the heart of Silver Creek, though the town around it had changed dramatically with the arrival of the railroad. What had once been a modest settlement now boasted a proper train station, a bank building of impressive brick construction, and enough new businesses to justify a weekly newspaper. Penelope Hayes, now 30 years old and more confident than she could have imagined possible in her earlier life, still presided over the restaurant with a firm but gentle hand. The business had expanded twice, first with the addition of a bakery section that supplied bread to most of the town, and then with a small catering operation that provided meals for special events and the passengers on the twice-weekly trains. Faith, now 5 years old and the spitting image of her father with her mother's quick mind, had been joined by a 3-year-old brother, Samuel, who toddled through the restaurant during off hours, charming the staff and regular customers alike. Finn continued as marshal, though his duties had evolved with the town's growth. He now had 2 deputies to assist with the increased population and the occasional troubles brought by the railroad connection to the wider world. Despite the demands of his position, He remained devoted to his family, arranging his schedule to have dinner with them each evening and spending his Sundays engaged in whatever adventures Faith and Samuel could devise. On a warm summer evening, as the restaurant closed after a particularly busy day, Penelope found herself alone in the kitchen, putting the finishing touches on a special dessert, a peach cobbler made with the first ripe peaches of the season, delivered that morning on the eastbound train. The sound of the back door opening announced Finn's arrival. She turned to greet him, a smile already forming at the sight of his familiar figure. "Something smells wonderful," he said, crossing the kitchen to press a kiss to her cheek. "Special occasion I forgot about." "No," she replied, returning to her task of arranging the lattice top on the cobbler. "Just felt like celebrating a bit. Any particular reason?" She glanced up to find him watching her with a knowing expression, as if he could read the secret she'd been harboring for the past week. "Perhaps," she admitted. "Dr. Wilson confirmed it yesterday. We're going to have another baby come winter." The joy that spread across Finn's face was as bright and unrestrained as it had been with each previous announcement. He gathered her into his arms, mindful of her work, and held her close. "That's the best news," he murmured against her hair. "How are you feeling?" "Wonderful," she assured him. "No morning sickness this time, at least not yet, just a sense that our family isn't quite complete." He pulled back to study her face, his eyes filled with tenderness. "You know, most men would be content with the perfect wife, 2 beautiful children, and a thriving business. But you keep finding ways to make me even more blessed." Penelope laughed, the sound echoing in the empty kitchen. "I believe you had something to do with this particular blessing, Marshall Hayes." "A fair point, Mrs. Hayes," he conceded with a grin. "Shall we take this cobbler home and tell the children their new sibling is on the way?" As they walked the short distance to their home, a proper house they had built 2 years earlier on a corner lot, just behind the restaurant, Penelope reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. From the depths of despair at that trading post to the heights of joy with her family, every step had led her to a place of security, purpose, and love she had once thought impossible. Faith and Samuel were already bathed and in their night clothes, having been supervised by Fiona's oldest daughter, who at 16 was a trusted babysitter. They squealed with delight at the sight of the cobbler, and with even greater enthusiasm at the news of a new brother or sister. "I hope it's a sister," Faith declared as she helped set the table for their impromptu celebration. "Boys are too noisy." "Hey," Samuel protested, his indignation causing the adults to suppress their laughter. "We'll be happy with whoever joins our family," Finn said diplomatically, ruffling his son's hair. "Just as we're happy with both of you." Later, after the children were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Penelope and Finn sat on the porch swing, watching as the first stars appeared in the deepening twilight. His arm around her shoulders, her head resting against him, they shared a comfortable silence born of years of companionship. "Do you ever think about that day?" Penelope asked eventually. "At the trading post." "Sometimes," Finn admitted. "Mostly to marvel at how close I came to missing you. If I'd been just an hour later on my rounds." "But you weren't," she reminded him. "You were exactly where you needed to be when I needed you most." He kissed the top of her head. "And I always will be, Penelope. That's a promise I intend to keep for the rest of our lives." As the night deepened around them, bringing with it the quiet sounds of a frontier town settling down for the evening, Penelope Hayes counted her blessings: her husband's steadfast love, their children's laughter, the life they had built together, and the future still unfolding before them. From being valued so little that she was sold for a single meal, she had found her way to a feast of love, family, and purpose that sustained her soul as surely as bread sustained her body. And in that knowledge, she found a contentment deeper than any she could have imagined on that fateful day when a tall stranger with storm-gray eyes had walked into a trading post and changed her life forever. "I love you," she whispered, the words as true now as the first time she had spoken them. "More with each passing day." "And I love you," Finn replied, his voice carrying the weight of a promise kept and renewed with every sunrise, "for all the days of our lives and beyond." In the distance, A train whistle sounded the last eastbound departure of the day, carrying passengers and freight back toward civilization. But here, in this moment, on this porch, with the man who had promised her a lifetime of feasting on love, and kept that promise in ways large and small every day since, Penelope Hayes knew she had found everything she would ever need. The feast would continue, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, with each new day bringing fresh blessings to savor and share. And that, she thought as Finn's hand found hers in the gathering darkness, was the greatest gift of all, not just surviving, but truly living, wrapped in the love of the family they had created together.